Alright, so now that the head's on, the easiest thing is to put the exhaust manifold back on. So that's what I'm going to do. One thing I forgot to mention, when you put the head on, make sure that it's at top dead center cylinder number 1. In other words, the camshaft keyway is facing up. The machine shop already did that for me, so I didn't have to worry about it, but make sure you do that when you put it back on. Otherwise, the valves could hit the pistons and you could cause damage when you tighten it down. Okay, so the head bolts are torqued all down to spec. As best as I could do with the popping bolts. So I've done a lot of research on this bolt popping situation, and you know, I couldn't find anything good about, you know, what to do about if the bolts pop, because you know, I just couldn't stop them from not doing it. But so I've done research, and I called up the machine shop and asked them their advice. And he says that sometimes they just pop, and I mean, there's really nothing much you can do. If you can't fix it, if you can't alleviate the problem, you tried everything in terms of oiling and stuff like that. You know, there's not much you can do other than just put it together as best as you can. Now, I also asked him about if the head gasket would be fine now that because I loosened the bolts then put them back on. He says yes, it should be okay. You know, additional research shows that that doesn't matter so much with the multi-layered steel head gaskets, which is what this is. If you get that other kind of head gasket, that kind of soft-ish material, I'm not sure what it's made out of, that would matter more because that compresses more. But the multi-layered steel gaskets don't really compress like that in terms of, you know, when you tighten the bolts down. So now an idea I had after the fact was I can see what I did when these things were popping is I looked at the ones that weren't popping and saw approximately how much the wrench was turning. And I just turned it approximately that much. So, an idea I had later was I could have just actually used a torque angle meter and determined how much each one needs to turn on that final torque, and then it wouldn't have mattered if it popped at all because that torque angle meter would have measured the degrees of rotation. So, you know, I could do that, but you know, I've already torqued the bolts a couple times, and the more you torque them, the more they stretch and the more apt they are to not give correct torque readings, and also the more apt they are to break. So I don't want to loosen these again unless I'm buying new ones. New ones from the dealer cost $70. And then, you know, even though he said the gasket is fine, if I loosened them again, I wouldn't. It would be weird. I would feel not right using the same gasket, and I would just be compelled to buy another one. So, if I'm loosening all this, I'm looking at another $125. You know, and you know, in the grand scheme of things, you might say, well, what does it matter if you mess up your engine? But you know, this is just what I'm deciding to do. It's gonna be. I want to get this done. And I'm taking a risk. That's what I'm doing. You guys will learn from it. So there's that. But we're going to continue on. So one more thing before we continue on. What I'm going to do is put the timing belt on and then do a leak down test. Just to see how well, if there's any sort of weird leaks in the cooling system or anything. And to see how well it's sealing while it's cold. Now when it gets warmed up, that's a different story because, you know, it's a different ball game entirely. But I'll feel better if I do a leak down test and it has good compression, or it has good leak down numbers, and it's nothing is leaking in the coolant jackets. That will make me feel at least a little better for continuing. But if I do that and I get some bad results, then I know 100% I cannot continue. So that's what I'm going to do. Alright, we're going to put the timing, or the camshaft pulley, or camshaft sprocket, excuse me, on. So we're going to do the same thing with putting a rag between our this little pry bar and the head so it doesn't damage it. Now we're just gonna tighten this up. Okay, and now let's make sure we're all in time still, because it moved a bit. So again, I'm just going to take a straight edge. I think that's perfect. It's right on the line. Okay. Okay, so next we're going to install the timing belt. So we're going to install it in a counterclockwise sequence. So we're going to start with the crankshaft pulley here. It's kind of hard to do with you guys in the way. Yeah, so let's pull out the pulley, put the belt on, and then push the pulley in. And by pulley I mean sprocket. So then next we're going to go around the tensioner. And then around the water pump. And then finally around the camshaft sprocket. And before I did this, I made sure that the engine was still in time on the crankshaft side. Here we go. Alright, next we're going to install this tensioner spring on this bolt right here. So let me get my pliers. Okay, so now that all that's on, we're going to slip the crank pulley back on. We're going to rotate it counterclockwise by hand 2 revolutions. And then check the timing marks. Put the key in there first. And then the pulley. Alright, it looks like I forgot to put the cover on that goes behind the camshaft sprocket. So, gonna have to take this off and do it again. Alright, let's put this guy on. There we go. Okay, now let's put everything back on. Okay, so belt's back on. I was having a little issue getting it in time, but what I did was, the problem was I was getting too much slack over here, so that when I turned it, first the sprockets would take up the slack and then it would start to move everything. So that little bit of wiggle room was enough to throw it at a time. So all I did was just move the pointer a little bit to the right of top dead center. That way when I turn it to take the slack out, it goes to top dead center and then it's all in time. So now that the timing is all set, we're going to tighten the tensioner pulley to 33 foot-pounds. There we go. And then we're going to remove the pin if we can. There we go. Alright, so we're going to install the camshaft position sensor now. If I can see in there. Okay, I got the bolt in. Now, there's a little peg here that the sensor goes in. So let's see if we can get that. Just gotta tighten her up. There we go. Alright, so next is the crankshaft position sensor. Got the bolt right here. So we just left it on the wire. I'm gonna have to see if there's a gap tolerance for that. Alrighty, next we're gonna put on this engine mount assembly, or engine mount bracket, whatever you want to call it. So we have 3 little bolts that go by where the exhaust manifold is. One of these bolts is a little smaller. That goes over on the far side one. Okay, we're going to tighten these bolts to 33 foot-pounds. The manual says to tighten these front ones by the exhaust manifold first. Alright, let's put the lower timing cover back on. Alright, I'm just going to put all these bolts in off camera because it's hard to film down here. Okay, now it's time to install the crank pulley. We're going to put the key in first, facing the right direction because it's rectangular. Then we're going to put the pulley on. We're going to thread the bolt on. I just lubricated the threads and underneath the washer with oil. Underneath, and by that I mean between the washer and the head of the bolt. Alright, we're just going to run this in with an impact. Okay, so this is a couple days later. What I found is I did a leak down test in all the cylinders, and I determined how much leakage is in each cylinder just to see if the head gasket is okay with the bolts and the tightening and everything like that. Well, these two were fine, number 1 and 4, but 2 and 3 were leaking between each other. So I put the air in this one, and then the air came out of this one right here. So that tells me that the head gasket wasn't properly sealed, and I'm glad that I did that because it was easy to take the head off at that point. You know, I didn't complete the job. So what I did was I bit the bullet, and I went to Honda and I bought another head gasket and head bolts from Honda. The other head bolts I bought were from Rock Auto. You know, same thing with their gasket. They both seem the same kind of quality, but you know, I felt like if I'm going to take it off, I might as well buy from the dealer. So I just finished doing another leak down test, and now everything is good. There's no cross leakage between the cylinders. I even, you know, plugged up the hoses and put my ear on one open coolant hose to see if there's any air going into the coolant system, and everything seems pretty good. You know, I'm gonna hope for the best because, and I say that because even with the new head bolts going on, the bolts were still popping. You know, particularly on the last round of torque. So you know, I mean, I did all I could. I even, hold on. You know, I even made my own little thread chaser by just grinding a little slot on both sides of this old head bolt, threading it in to clean the threads, and I did that a couple times. Sprayed it out real good, oiled everything. I mean, I did all I could to stop these bolts from popping when I'm tightening them, but I just, you know, there's only so much you could do. So now, I mean, it seems good. I'm gonna hope for the best. But one thing I found was that the exhaust valves had a decent amount of leakage between them in the numbers 2 and 3. I don't know, you know, if you recall, I talked to the machine shop guy, and he said he didn't recommend valve jobs because it'll just push all the pressure at the bottom end, and you'll get tons of blow by. So, you know, you know, live and learn with this kind of stuff. Next time if I have an engine this old, you know, 200,000 miles, and this head gasket blows, I'm just going to put another engine in there. You know, it's just going to be way easier to put another engine in there because, you know, if I got the valve job, I would have gotten excessive blow-by. And not doing the valve job doesn't have excessive blow-by, but it has leaky valves. So, you know, you're compromising here. Anyway, I'm done yammering. Let's put the intake back on. We're going to put our new intake manifold gasket on. Alrighty, in goes the intake. Oh man, something fell. Lower the engine. There we go. Alright, now somehow I need to thread all of these nuts on. I'm going to do this off camera because it's impossible to film. Alright, so as you guys probably already know, the two nuts that I took out initially on these two sides below that were a pain in the ass, I did not need to take out. I just needed to take out the middle nut here. So these other two nuts held the plastic intake to this metal part. So I put those nuts on with the intake off. Now the only nut I need to put on is this one in the middle, which is really annoying to get to. So what I'm going to do is put the nut in a gear wrench like this and just fish it down there that way and hold it with my finger on the other side. I'm only getting one click, but that's all I need. Okay, start from the middle, work our way out. Then we have these weird fasteners over here. And then we have these bolts on the side. Alright, we got this one last bolt here. Alrighty, now we're going to put the upper timing belt cover on. Just goes on like that. Now there's also one back here, but my little ear where the bolt goes into broke when I was taking it out. So I'm just going to use the two. Should be fine. Okay, we're going to put on the engine mount now. Alright, so now we're in the valve cover. First thing we're going to do is replace the gasket, since we have a new one in the kit that I bought. Sucker's in there good. Okay, we're also going to take out these spark plug tube seals. Yeah. Seal puller here. There we go. Put the new ones in there. Alrighty, let's put the new gasket on. Cleaned up the valve cover a little bit. Let's put in the dipstick.